Hi guys, do you have that book in your life that you've always wanted to read, but you've never got around to reading for whatever reason? Or maybe you just want to start reading more in general. But maybe there's been a book that everyone's talked about and you want to have that same shared experience, but you haven't had the time or it keeps getting moved further down the TBR. So for me, that is Les Miserables. This is a behemoth of a book. Like you could do deadlifts with this book. I can't remember the first time I saw it, but ever since I can remember, I have planned on reading it. So the musical Les Mis has literally changed my life. It's helped set up how I see the world, how we need to forgive people, how we can rise above our past sins, how there is suffering in this life, but there is so much beauty. So now I don't have a bunch of expectations that I will enjoy the book more than the musical, because the musical has nostalgia on its side, not to mention the power of melody. But the story has been a huge part of my life, and I want to read the story, as huge as it is. So let's jump into this episode, friends. You are listening to Magic in the Ordinary, where we talk about ordinary things in our life, like books, and spend a moment appreciating how good and beautiful those ordinary things are. And we're taking steps to living life intentionally and talking about taking a moment to laugh and appreciate the world around us. So today we're talking about books. And when I started doing research for how good reading is for your brain, I found a lot of studies, but I also kind of felt like we know reading is good for us. We know literacy can help us succeed in school and our jobs. So it felt kind of obvious to me. And I decided I wanted to share a little bit more personal reasons for reading and maybe think of it like first person science. But here are three reasons that I think we should be reading. And number one, because when we have words to describe our own lived experiences, it gives us power. When we have the ability to describe our world and ourselves, there's power in that. Whenever we read, we get new words to process our own experiences or phrases of thought that can help us better understand our own lives. So I personally really love my brain when I'm reading Jane Austen. She's got this perfect blend of like snarky humor and intelligent analysis that helps me not to take things too seriously. There's that quote: a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. That hater on Instagram must feel the urge to increase my interaction, and the absurdity of their comments makes anger give way to pity. Jane Austen helps give me phrases to use, but also more complex language to kind of analyze the world around me. And I love when I can better understand my world and become more connected with it. As a teacher, I've had the experience of watching how my students' writing changes after they read certain books. So when they read good books, they have a better vocabulary and they add what they like from those books that they're reading into their own personal writing styles. And that is fantastic for their academic performance and their future career as writers. But beyond that, I've seen how it impacts how they process their own life. So here's one question I like to ask myself when I read a book, and that is, what are my thought patterns after reading this? Because I've seen some smart students who read YA novels and they start struggling to speak and to write in complete sentences, and their brain is so bogged down with the word vomit you can sometimes find in stories these days that they're doing things that people say is going to help them, but it's actually having a negative impact. And watching this has really strengthened my belief that what you read matters every bit as if you can read, every bit as much as if you can read. So, what we read can give us the power of words to express ourselves and to better understand ourselves. And this brings us to point two. I think reading can change who we are. So we all get to make choices about who we decide to be. Books don't just give us vocabulary words and phrases of thought to help us better understand ourselves and our world, but also it gives us example of what certain strengths look like and how to get those strengths, those virtues. So they also help us better understand the consequences of actions before we take those actions. I've heard that the brain doesn't differentiate between fiction and lived experience. I don't think that's quite true. It does differentiate that to some extent, but according to the National Library of Medicine, it's complicated. And the point is, we can get access to a certain life experience without having the repercussions of that in our own life. We can learn from mistakes. We can travel to new places. We can meet new people with new perspectives, all from our armchair. So, the human transformation that comes through reading never ceases to astonish me for better and for worse. I've seen multiple girls whose high school love lives go up in flames in part because of the YA books that they were reading. They're reading about abusive boys in the stories, and then they begin to hunt for them in real life. And sometimes it's hard to understand why this teen boy who says cruel stuff isn't like the assassin in the book who was, yeah, he was hard hearted and cruel, sure, but like he always says the exact sweet romantic stuff you want to hear. And on the flip side, I've seen students whose posture changes and whose confidence grows massively because of the heroes that they've watched rise above hardship. These students also become heroes. They're given tools to battle their own dragons. So I mentioned earlier how the musical Les Mis has transformed how I approach the world. Everything I read impacts how I approach the world. I know this, so I'm careful about what I stick inside my brain. And this doesn't mean it's all serious content either. Like, I love books that make me laugh or just make me smile. That has a positive impact as well. And I like thinking of it like this: every book says something about what it means to live a good life. Every book says something about what it means to live a good life. I remember reading a cartoon about a bunny rabbit who wanted to become a beautiful ballerina. And this bunny rabbit lied, cheated, did whatever she needed to do to get to be a ballerina. And she eventually got there. And there was a not so subtle message in this story that sometimes you got to lie and you got to cheat if you want to get what you want. And Zootopia is kind of a parallel story, kind of similar. It's about another bunny, right, who works for what she wants, but she does not compromise her morals. And she learns that differences are beautiful and you can make your dreams come true, even if there are obstacles. So the stories may look similar, but at the core, there's a different value, there's a different principle. So that's the question I like to ask. Like, when I'm reading a book or even when I'm watching a movie, what does the story say it means to live a good life? And it's fascinating because what you're really seeing is you're seeing the author's worldview coming through, and then you get to decide whether or not you agree with it. You can think about whether it lines up with reality. Do hard hearted assassins make good boyfriends? Does courage actually work when you're facing real life monsters? What do you think? And what do you choose? What you choose to do with the answers is going to shape who you become and the course of your life. So, books can give us the word to express ourselves and to understand ourselves and actually shape who we are. And that brings us to point three. I think reading is so great because some great things have been written. Okay, so I promise this relates, but when I was in Athens, Greece, I remember seeing Mount Lycabettus rising above the city. So it's above all the crumbling marble buildings and the other, gray green hills in the distance. And it's actually the tallest point in central Athens. So when you see a mountain like that, it just calls you. Like, I knew I needed to hike it. And it was one of the most exhausting things I did in Athens, but it felt like it needed to be done. And I don't know, I feel like humanity, like, we can't resist mountains. We keep dying on Mount Everest, but we also keep conquering. And so when we see something big and beautiful and difficult, like, there's a part of us that knows that that is part of our story. We need to climb the mountains to get stronger, to find that part of ourselves. So I don't know, I think that's partly why we need to read good books, because someone else has climbed the top of a metaphorical mountain and created something real and powerful and big and beautiful and complex. Like, these stories have mountains of information about what it means to be human and explores that in new ways. So they're mountains that we want to conquer. And we might not all be called to climb the same mountain. We all have different stories. So what book is calling to you? Which book is on your bucket list? For me, it's Les Mis. And I really hope that 2026 is the year I reach the summit. If you don't have a book that is calling you in particular, I do invite you to read Les Mis with me. So let's climb the mountain together. Which this brings us to the challenge portion of this episode. Today's challenge is to read a book, but I'm going to add a few twists to this. Number one, pick a book that's over 100 years old. This guarantees that the book has withstood the test of time and definitely has something good to say, or probably has something good to say. Number two, look at how many pages it has, but don't read the ending. Kind of divide that up and calculate how many pages you want to read each day. So for me, it's Les Mis. It's 1,432 pages, which it's a lot. And that means I'm going to try to read roughly 5 pages a day for like under 300 days. roughly 300 days, and I'll definitely have it done. So if you have a shorter book, feel free to pick a different number. If you want to get done faster than 300 days, feel free to pick a different number. But the important thing is basically, I challenge you to give yourself a very doable number of pages to read each day and then plan out how long it will take so that we're kind of setting ourselves up for success. So, number 3, while you're reading, ask yourself questions. What does this book say it means to live a good life? How does my brain feel when I'm reading this book? What am I learning from this book? Do I agree? Who do I want to become? So, engaging with it. And speaking of that, brings us to point 4, read it with a pencil in your hands or a pen or highlighter. Chesterton says that reading a book with a pencil turns that book from a monologue into a dialogue. And I love that. So underline the parts that you think are beautiful, highlight them if that's more your pace, rewrite passages in your own words, or write questions next to the paragraphs that you think are confusing. This is how I love annotating things. Responding to characters with little comments in the margins, being like, why do you think this? Or, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. I love doing that. Basically, make the book your own, unless it's a library book that is not just yours. But I would recommend getting a book for this challenge because I think that's part of the joy of it and part of how we reap the benefits. So, and number 5 is share it with a friend. There are books that I have read on repeat since I was little, and I still learn something new whenever I read those books with students. They bring their own life experiences and perspectives to the table, and our discussions are really fun because of that. So I challenge you to invite another reader. And if you don't want to, then consider this your invitation from me. Let's read Les Mis together. And hey, I'm always looking for new book recommendations. So, what books are you reading? Please let me know in the comments. And I wish you all the very best as you climb your own personal mountains. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Until next time, friends, happy reading.